Welcome to this episode of Unraveling Adoption, an intentional space to delve into adoption's complexities together. I'm Beth Syverson. I'm an adoptive mom of a brave and wise 19-year-old son, Joey, who is struggling to find his path. I'm walking beside him while working on my own personal growth and healing. We are committed to helping anyone touched by adoption, and we want to help the general public understand adoption's complexities better too. Today's guest is Kira Omans, a Chinese adoptee who was raised in Alexandria, Virginia, by white adoptive parents in a predominantly white community. She is an actor, stunt person, and voiceover artist living in Los Angeles now. And she is fierce. I watched some of her stunt reel, and you did not want to mess with this woman. It is amazing. So, in addition to her work in front of the camera and microphone, she is also advocating for adoptees, especially transracial adoptees, aiming to improve how adoptees are treated in the media. So, thanks so much for being here on Unraveling Adoption, Kira. Glad to have you here.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Good. And since I have a transracially adopted Asian son, I am all ears to learn from your lived experience. I want to listen to as many of you transracially adopted Asian people as I possibly can. So let's start with the basics of your adoption story. What parts of it would you like to share with us?
So, I was adopted from Zhongshan, China, which is in the Guangdong province, when I was about 10 months old. And I grew up in Alexandria, Virginia. And I have a younger brother who was adopted from Korea and a younger sister who is my parents' biological child.
Mm.
And I went to a predominantly white private Catholic school for 10 years from pre-K to 8th grade.
Mm.
And it was not very diverse. And my parents did a lot to make sure I had a connection to my culture outside of school. I did Chinese dance and I went to Chinese school for a few years.
Mhm.
But growing up in that environment and having that be my social situation for
Mhm.
so long really affected how I viewed myself and my adoption story as
Mhm.
well. I went to a much more diverse high school and really found my voice there, started doing theater and fell in love with acting.
Mm.
Then I went to George Mason University, got my BFA in
Mm.
performance for stage and screen and a communications minor. And now I live in Los Angeles and, like you
Hey,
said, work in the entertainment industry.
that's amazing. You're doing what, every actor kid wants to do. Like you're actually doing it. And I'm so impressed with you because even though there's currently still a writer's strike and actors are not acting right now, you are doing the audiobook narration, which is not in the same union. So you're able to still work, which is
Yep,
amazing.
I'm very grateful that it's one of the only side contracts that you're allowed to work and not be crossing the picket line, so still have my job.
Ah, yeah, you and the radio talk show hosts, I guess, because they keep saying,
Mhm.
yeah, we're not in that same union or something. So, wow, it's pretty crazy. And I know so many adoptees who are either professional actors or have loved acting as a hobby. And do you think there's some sort of correlation between that? Why are adoptees so drawn to the acting field?
You know, I can't speak for everyone, but at least for myself, I just grew up loving stories, and I think that's something everyone in the entertainment industry shares. But at least for myself, I had such an imaginative mind growing up,
Mm,
and whether that was being used to think about my own origin
hmm.
story and my birth parents or whatever the case may be, because I didn't know so much of my own story in life,
Hmm.
that it just became something fun for me to do and not always the most healthy thing. But I think that as far as the correlation between my adoption story and my career, that there could be a link there. Not entirely sure. And like I said, can't speak for everyone.
It's just anecdotal evidence. And I
Mhm.
can imagine that it'd be wonderful to live in this fantasy land and make money at it and do it professionally, like to take yourself out of whatever your reality is, which might be very painful, that might be a draw for adoptees. I know my son always had a very big imagination too, although he didn't ever go into acting, but I'm sure that there's a part of adoptees that just want to create something that maybe that you can control or that you have power over since there's so much of your story that maybe you don't even know. Does that resonate with you at all?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. Well, I'm really impressed with you that you've been able to make this career happen. And it's so hard for anyone, I'm sure, to make this life in LA and to do the media, all the different ways you do media. So I'm very impressed with you. And I watched some of your videos on your website and your reels, and it's just so amazing.
Thank you.
And I watched your Chinese dancing, the ribbon dance. Oh my gosh,
Mhm.
that's so pretty. I love that. And I'm sure it's much more difficult than it looks. I mean, it looks very complicated, but I'm like, she's just making these circles and spirals. And I'm sure it's not just like you pick that thing up and do that. I'm sure it's really hard.
Yeah, I've been doing it since I was really little.
Yeah. Is that you started Chinese dancing when you were really young?
Oh, yeah, I was 4 years old,
Oh my
so I've been
gosh.
doing it for over 20 years now.
Okay. So you just grew up doing it. That's amazing. And I'm so glad that your parents found that for you. Is it something that you, at 4, maybe you didn't even know it existed? Were they trying to connect you with your heritage on purpose?
So I had gone to this organization called Families with Children from China, and now it's Chinese Adoptee Alliance, and I actually work on the communications committee for
Oh,
them now.
nice.
But at the time, they had an event in DC where my dance troupe performed, and I was just enraptured.
Mhm.
And so my parents were just like, okay, we obviously have to do something. She loves this. They bought their DVD, and I would just dance in front of the TV
Oh,
every night and just absolutely fell in love with it and still love it to this day. So my parents were like, okay, she loves this. We have to enroll her in this. And so it's been my primary connection to my Chinese culture my entire life. And
mm,
my dance teacher has been so instrumental in helping me feel like I even belong in that
yeah.
culture and feeling like I'm part of it. So I'm always grateful to her for that.
Oh, that's lovely. Because I wonder if, especially maybe in your teen years, or if there's a lot of Chinese people that were raised with Chinese parents and everything, that you might feel like they are one up over you or something like that. Like, ooh, do I really belong here? I can imagine that that could be awkward, but it sounds like your teacher was helpful in that.
Oh, yes, and 100% to what you were just saying. I think that even if people don't necessarily try to make adoptees feel isolated in that way, and there are people who do, there
Yeah.
are aspects of the larger community that feel very exclusive
Hmm.
and gatekeepy. But even if you're not made intentionally to feel that way,
Hmm.
it just does because there are some aspects of being the first generation Asian American that we adoptees miss out on because we were raised in white families and often white communities.
Yeah, there's all sorts of cultural things that you don't even realize you're doing when you're raised
Mhm.
in a culture. I started going to a taiko group, which is the Japanese drumming, and I love it so much. But I originally did it, I wanted Joey to do it with me, my son. But as soon as a mom does something, it's not cool for a teenage son to do anymore. So then he didn't do it. But he loves that I do it. But someday I want him to do it with me. But there's all sorts of things in the studio, you bow in, you bow out, and there's all sorts of rules that sometimes they have to stop the class and say, okay, you guys, you can't just walk in here late and join the class. You have to be invited by the teacher. And there's all sorts of things that if you don't grow up in that culture, I'm sure I've made some mistakes like, oops. And they would look at me
Mhm.
probably and go, oh, there's a white girl trying to do stuff. But I'm sure there's lots of things that adoptees miss growing up in a transracial family that you just have to pick up along the way somehow.
Absolutely, and it's hard when there are those societal expectations of people when they see us because we look Asian,
Yeah.
that we would absolutely understand that full experience, and I also wanna
Yes.
clarify that I truly believe that because we weren't raised in that kind of household, that doesn't make us any less Asian American
Absolutely.
than other Asian Americans who have a very different life experience. We're all part of that diaspora.
Oh, absolutely. Every single person is coming at it from a different lens, right? But yeah,
Mhm.
when you walk out in culture in our grocery store or whatever, you are a Chinese American.
Exactly.
You can't hide that. And yeah, people are going to look at you and figure that you know all of these cultural things. So let's see. How has it been as an actor in LA? Have you felt like you've gotten the roles you deserve as a person? Do you think being Asian has affected any of the roles you've received? How has that been for you on a professional level?
So, when I first started acting on the East Coast and got my first agent and began going out for film and television roles, all the roles that I went out for were so small. They were bit parts,
Mm.
stereotypical, like nail technician with 2 lines, nurse,
Oh, yeah.
babysitter, things like that.
Ah,
And I saw such a major shift in the industry when Crazy Rich Asians came out.
ah,
And that was just a huge win for our community.
yes.
And since then, I have started to see some more complex roles. I've been fortunate enough to play a lot of roles that I truly connect with and that I've been able to add my own experiences into developing a
Mhm.
character. And so I've been really fortunate. I feel very happy with a lot of the roles that I've played. And moving out to LA and breaking into this market and working with my agent and manager, I feel like I have people on my team who truly understand what I would like to do and the roles that I would like to play and how I'd like to represent not only the characters that I play, but myself through my career.
Mm.
And so I feel like I'm very much on a good path with that.
Oh, I'm so glad. When you initially said that you were getting roles as a nail technician, it just sounds like a bad joke. Like, really? That's what you're getting? That's
Hmm.
horrible. But yeah, I think Crazy Rich Asians just blew everything open, it seems like. And I'm so happy for that. And I know we're not done. Like, I know it's not like, okay, we're done now with racism, but it made a huge difference. I just saw Barbie movie yesterday. Simu was amazing. And the thing I loved about him is that his Asianness wasn't a part of anything. It was just like he was the friend. Like they didn't have to like do
Hmm.
some sort of stereotypical trope or have him use chopsticks. It
Hmm.
wasn't anything like that. It was just like his friend, period. Now it would have been nicer to have him be the main lead, but one thing at a time. But I thought that was really cool. Did you enjoy that or did you notice anything that was more disturbing than that or was it positive for you?
No, as far as Emu's character's representation, no, I didn't have any kind of problem with that. I enjoyed the Barbie movie a lot, thought it had a good message,
Hmm.
and I'm excited for what it does in terms of how people think about feminism in the future.
Yes. Yeah, I think it's getting a lot of people thinking. Now, while we're recording this, this big bombshell has gone off in the adoption world and in the movie world of the movie Blindside. Now, that is kind of a very famous adoption movie.
Hmm.
Do you want to just give a little background of that movie and let's talk about what's happening now and uncover all this stuff?
Sure. So I haven't actually seen the film, mostly because in adoptee circles, it very much has a reputation for upholding white saviorist ideals.
Hmm.
And Michael, who the story is based on, is not happy with his portrayal in that film.
Hmm.
And so I try not to support films that adoptees feel that their story was exploited or that they're
Hmm.
misrepresented in major ways,
Hmm.
like the way that they portrayed his birth mother and the way that they portrayed him.
Hmm.
And that movie made me feel icky, just
Yeah.
the premise of it for a while. So I did not see it. But now a lot of things have come out that are not great, and that Michael was not legally adopted when
Hmm.
he was coerced into signing into that conservatorship for them to use his story in any way that they wanted and to profit off it
Hmm.
in such major ways. There have been discrepancies about how much money the family has made,
Hmm.
but just to focus on the part that he was not legally adopted. And it just breaks my heart that he thought that signing into that so they could exploit his story for profit when he was not even legally adopted. I mean, even if he was legally adopted, that's not okay.
Right,
But
right.
just for
Oh,
him to be led to believe that that was part of the adoption process is absolutely vile.
it's
And there's
horrendous.
a lot more to delve into, but that's one of the pieces of it that just really made me mad.
Oh, yeah. And as far as I know, he's received 0 for the film or the
Mhm.
book, like 0. And,
Mhm.
of course, he made money at the NFL, whatever, but he's a subject of that film and book. He should have made the most
Mhm.
out of everything. So it's a horrible story. And the parents now are kind of talking back and saying, oh, no, he got what he needed and we aren't here for the money. And it's like, oh,
It's wild. In the New York Times article, it's so crazy to hear the different sides of it, how the adoptive dad, I just am using air quotes
yeah,
because, again,
right.
he hadn't been legally adopted,
Yeah, that's right.
but just how he said that they all got 14K.
Ah,
And then the adoptive brother said that he has received 60 to $70,000 in the last 5 to 6 years. And so just outside looking in, obviously we don't know all the details, but there's just already such a discrepancy there. And I'm just really hoping that Michael has no problem proving these things in
yeah.
court. He said that he found out about a lot of these things in February. Hopefully, has just been
Hmm.
gathering
Yeah.
evidence before he went public
Yeah.
with this. And that's also the other part of a lot of people's complaints about it, aside from everyone whose main response has been, why would you throw the family who raised you under the bus? All of
Yes.
these like adoptees
Oh,
should be grateful feeding
oh,
into
it's
that narrative.
horrible.
And that's how harmful that is. But also people being like, why is this happening now? That movie came out forever ago. Well, he just figured out some of these
They
things
just found
now. A
out.
lot of
Yeah.
adoptees have this paper trail. You find out about things later. A lot of adoptees who don't have citizenship don't realize it until they're an adult,
Yeah.
when that should have been done when they were a baby. Michael was young. I just don't know how you would even begin to even find out or look into the fact that you were not legally adopted. It blows my mind.
Yeah, you'd have to really have some realization that maybe this isn't true.
Hmm.
And why would you do that if people told you, yeah, you're adopted and we love you and you're part of our family? Oh, so that story, the Blindside movie and the horrible, horrible results of that is really just one of many films and TV shows that depict adoption in a bad way. Can you give us some
Hmm.
other examples of that white saviorism in films and TV?
Yeah, so because adoptees are not the dominant voice in
Mm,
adoption and media, because for so long, so many of us were children and
mhm,
we're not able to speak for ourselves. Adoptive parents are so centered in that
mhm,
conversation. And so I think about that in terms of the movie Instant Family as well, which is obviously written from the perspective of an adoptive parent. But because of that, I think that it can be a bit limited in
mhm,
how it portrays the adoptee experience. And I did a whole other review on that movie. And I think that there are some things that it did right. I think that it explored some themes that aren't often seen in movies like that. But I think that The Blind Side really set a precedent for adoption stories being such heartwarming
mm,
stories. Like this family took this poor kid in and gave him a life. And it just really upsets me because the underlying message of that is that he wouldn't have been great on his own with his Black peers, that he needed to be adopted by a white family in order to achieve greatness. And also, shouldn't he be so grateful because of this white family and because of his mom, Sandra Bullock's character, like he
mhm,
was able to be the greatest that he could be.
mm,
And it's just an upsetting narrative and one that you see over and over again because adoptees are so infantilized in
yeah,
media and just seen as subjects in need of rescue, and
mhm,
that they were given an opportunity at a better life. So they should be so grateful to their parents.
yes,
And I
ugh,
just appreciate that my parents never tried to instill that, because I know many adoptees whose parents have internalized that belief and do believe that their children should be grateful to them because they adopted them. And my parents are very pragmatic about it. They are like, we wanted a child, we wanted a family, just like anyone else who wants to be
yeah,
parents.
yeah.
This is how we did it. It wasn't any big act of
They weren't trying to rescue you.
yeah, exactly. Like it wasn't any big humanitarian act or act of charity.
Yeah,
We wanted a child and you fulfilled that need for us
yeah,
as well. So it wasn't just we were doing something for you. That's not true.
no. If anything, it's more the opposite, like, you're
Mhm.
filling our need. It's more
Mhm.
that but people kind of flip it around and make it seem like, "Oh, we're helping these poor children that would die in the orphanages if we didn't blah, blah, blah." But if there wasn't adopted parents paying a bunch of money, there probably would be no orphanages that would be feeding them. It's just a big,
Mhm.
systemic issue. What other tropes do you see in movies and TV about adoptees? We got the white saviorism, child needs to be rescued trope. What else is there?
There is a huge and in movies that you wouldn't even think about, but the orphan trope is a trope that I talk about a lot, and
Mm.
how especially in Disney movies and children's movies, so from a young age you're seeing this, characters you wouldn't even think about. But in Frozen, Anna and Elsa's parents pass away and
Oh.
they're orphans. Like in Tarzan, I think when I was younger, a really lucid moment that I had when I was just like, "Oh my goodness, the gorillas are his adoptive family because
Oh,
his
wow.
parents were killed in the
Yeah.
beginning of the movie." Hercules, Snow White, like all these
Yeah.
characters. I could go on. I'm
Bambi. Yeah.
um
There's so many.
yeah, Bambi, it's used as a trope in order to get the protagonist to be able to go on the journey that they
Mhm.
need to go on without necessarily the interference of parents.
Oh.
And
Mm.
because it's so prevalent, I think a lot of times people think that they have an understanding of orphans and adoption
Uh-huh.
and found family and like those kinds of tropes
Mhm.
that adoptees are used to tell those stories without people truly understanding that experience. And so
Yeah.
I saw this in Joyride, where I really felt like because the orphan trope is so prevalent and because adoption is portrayed in so many movies, even if it's not necessarily about a transracial adoptee growing up in America,
Hmm.
you know, because there are so many of these portrayals of adoption that we might not even recognize. Even professional writers don't always think that they have to do due diligence in order
Hmm.
to write our stories.
Because it's so common. They just dig into the lake of these themes that are so, so, so common. And it's almost like they got to start the protagonist off with the worst possible thing that could happen to a person,
Hmm.
right?
A
And
tragic
that,
backstory.
yeah,
Hmm.
you got to have something tragic. And that just must feel terrible as an adoptee to just watch something like your story over and over, like, what is the worst thing that could happen? And then,
Hmm.
yeah, God, it's just in like Star Wars, Superman, there's so many superhero movies that rely on that same trope too, right?
Exactly, and how romanticized it is, and
Mhm.
how because you lost your parents, you're able to undergo this great metamorphosis of your
Yes.
character. And that a lot of times in movies where there is a reunification where you find out who the birth
Mhm.
parent is, and just how reunion is seen as the end all be all, that that
Yeah.
is what will give you closure.
Mm.
And so many, most transracial adoptees will never get that.
Especially in Asia, it's very, very difficult, right? And
Mhm.
not very many people have done DNA there. Is that the main reason? Or the records or
At least for myself, being adopted during the one child policy, because there's no paper trail, because so many babies were abandoned
mm.
in
Mm.
public places, there is no way to trace. Whereas many Korean adoptees that I know have been able to undergo a birth search because there's some kind of paper trail.
Okay.
But in China, at least,
Mm.
there is nothing.
Yeah, so that just must leave you feeling so empty when you see, like, I am your father, these simplistic resolutions, like, okay, now he's fine. He started from this very dark place, climbed this mountain, found birth parents, and now happily ever after. And you're like, ugh, shoot, that will never happen for me. Ugh.
Exactly, and I think that that just promotes such a harmful narrative for adoptees to think that that's the only way in which they'll find closure in life, because
Mm.
when I was first going on this journey and was first sharing my story, I had so many people who would be like, "Why don't you want to find your birth
Oh,
parents?" That would keep me up at night, and it's like, "Okay, well, first of all, you're not living my life, so you don't know how I feel about these
yeah.
things, and I'm very valid in my feelings
Hmm.
about my birth parents and my own story that I have
Yeah.
lived." And second of all, I think that that was an idea fed to you through the media, that that's the only way an adoptee will ever feel a complete sense of closure in their life is to
Oh,
answer all these mysteries when sometimes it's just not an option.
yeah. Yeah, and sometimes you go searching for your birth family and it turns out to be horrible and makes things worse. So
Exactly.
the
Exactly.
media makes things very simple and real life is so much more complex. What other adopted characters do you see that bother you in the media?
I think there are a lot.
Mhm.
Just to touch upon the movie that just came out, Joyride,
Mhm.
I think that while there were elements to that character where I felt like the writers truly understood the transracial adoptee experience, like
Mhm.
there was a line in Joyride where Audrey, the adopted character, says that maybe if she felt this sense of belonging, that she wouldn't feel so pressured to be perfect all the time. And
Mm.
that's a sentiment that I very much resonate with.
Mhm.
However, there were a lot of elements to her character that I really did not like. And the way in which she was othered by her other Chinese American friends
Mhm.
really did not sit well with me, and how the blame is often placed on the adoptee for
Mm.
not connecting to their culture, talking about some of the things we were mentioning earlier about how there are all these expectations that adoptees be as, quote, Asian American as everybody else
Yeah.
without growing up in that environment. And that is our responsibility to seek those things out for ourselves. And that's a very difficult process, especially
Mhm.
when you don't grow up with any of those resources, or you might not have adoptive parents who are supportive of that.
Mhm.
So, what are you supposed to do?
Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. To expect yes, I think that's really, really tough. Unfortunately, I haven't seen that film, but I need to see that one. I've heard a lot about that one. What about like characters like the Joker and like these
Mm.
crazy murderous adoptee characters? Do you see that a lot in the media?
100%. I find that in dramas or tragedies, adoptees are portrayed as so troubled and having all these abandonment issues and just being mentally unwell. And in comedies, they're portrayed as these prodigy children
Oh.
and like the type primed to go on an adventure. But to speak to the Joker, I do think that sometimes when you add that tragic backstory and people attribute all these issues that a person might
Mhm,
have to an adoption, it really simplifies everything in a very demeaning way
mhm,
where like, "Oh, you're adopted, you must have so many abandonment issues," which is
mhm.
something that is said to adoptees, which I am
Oh,
just like, that is something that the media told you about us.
yeah. Well, and some adoptees might, but it's really rude to tell that to somebody. Like,
Oh, 100%,
doesn't
you know,
doesn't everybody have these issues? Oh my goodness.
I think that you can have abandonment issues and not be adopted. I mean, it's
Absolutely, I
like
have
a very
them.
personal thing, and obviously sometimes
Yeah.
sometimes things stem from it, and I know that at least for myself, as I've learned more about myself and explored more of my own history and my own feelings on adoption, way more of my issues than I initially thought go back to my adoption. And I do believe that adoption is a trauma, but I think that with such a one dimensional
Yes.
understanding of that trauma, it can be really harmful to adoptees and to the narrative surrounding our lives and how we're
Mhm.
treated.
Absolutely. It's the simplicity of it. Because in a 2-hour movie, you can't, so I think it's necessary to make characters kind of boil them down to the barest elements. But I think maybe some more adoptees need to be involved with the process. Is that how do we fix this? How do we make adopted characters more three-dimensional?
100%. I think that it starts with actually investing in the adoptee community
Mm,
and actually having story developers, directors, writers seeking out adoptees to learn a variety of experiences. Because I've said this before, but even if you're only telling one adoptee story, it's so important to integrate yourself into the community to understand the
mhm,
needs of that community, especially if you're representing them on screen to a wider audience
mhm.
and people's beliefs about adoption and adoptees will be affected
Yeah.
by this
Yeah.
film.
Yeah.
And regardless of intentions, that's what will happen. And real people's lives are affected by this. So I think that it's important for people to, just like you would hopefully do for any other life experience or culture, that you would get to know the people who have lived it so you can tell the most accurate story. And also to hire adoptees.
Yes.
I also believe that if you're not willing to do those things, that it's not your story to tell, and
Mhm.
that it's better to hire someone or put an adoptee in a prominent position to be able to share that, because that's my main qualm with Joyride is I truly think that if an adoptee had been in a prominent position on that film, I would not feel so excluded by the narrative that
Mm.
was given, because even if I don't agree with that experience,
Mhm.
that's not mine.
Uh-huh.
And if it was another adoptees, if I felt like an adoptee played a prominent role in showing everything that happened or in sharing their story, then I would have felt that's fine, because
Uh-huh.
that's their story and they
Mhm.
have ownership of that. But when we don't have ownership of our own stories, we're very outside looking in and feel like the butt of a joke,
Oh, yeah.
or that we're being made to look a certain way without being invited in.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Well, and speaking of being the butt of the joke, how many times in media have we heard that, "Well, you're adopted," like an insult as a punchline, right?
Exactly. It's just another way for people to other
Yes.
adoptees,
That must feel terrible.
because by saying that you're adopted, it's saying you don't belong with us.
Yeah, right, and that's the biggest insult you can give to somebody, and, ugh, that hurts so bad, I'm sure. Oh my gosh. What about there's a famous series, This Is Us, that had a transracial adoptee as main part of that show. And I understand that Angela Tucker, who is a transracial adoptee, a Black person, consulted on that show. How do you feel about
Mhm.
how that character was portrayed? And did it help to have Angela there?
Oh, Angela's phenomenal. I have so much respect and admiration for her. And I think that that's why the portrayal of the adoptee in This Is Us is widely accepted in the
Mm-hmm.
adoption community as being an accurate
Mm-hmm.
depiction because they took the time to actually speak to someone knowledgeable. Because Angela also not only has her own adoption story, but is so keyed into the
Yeah.
community's needs as a whole, has done so much work in the community and for the visibility of adoptees and has so much respect there. She was such a
Mm-hmm.
perfect person to
Yeah.
consult for that film. And I think that it's important to consult a
Mm-hmm.
variety of people. But as far as the portrayal of that adoptee character, I think that they actually were doing their due diligence to make sure that it was
Mm-hmm.
accurate. And I'm
Yeah.
happy with that.
His story was expressed, over a long period of time with a lot of complexity. It wasn't just a one-dimensional
Hmm.
thing. So, yeah, so it can be done well. And are you doing that kind of work too? Do you consult with people or do you want to?
I will if there are opportunities
If
to do
anyone's
that.
listening that's writing a show, yes, and you want to get the adoptee on board early in the process, right? So in case you have to change stuff. Yeah, so hire adoptees, people, as soon as you get to start writing again, as soon as the strike ends. Oh man.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you'd like to say about the media or about your story that we didn't get to?
I think that we've had a really good conversation. I'm really happy with the questions that you were asking and think that a lot of good ideas have been
Good.
exchanged.
Is that the consultancy? Is that the best way that we can help new media just by involving adoptees? Is that the best way, or is there another way I'm not thinking about?
Yeah, I think that a lot of it comes with doing your own
Hmm.
research first and not purely just asking adoptees
Yeah.
to educate
Hmm.
you. And I think that going into the community, doing the work, looking at all the advocates, and also just reflecting on, is adoption necessary to the story?
Yeah.
Why do I want to have an adoptee character in
Yeah.
the first place? Because I think that that also can feed into these negative portrayals, is just when the adoption is used in an
Hmm.
exploitative way in which it's used for
Yeah.
emotional pull because of the tragic backstory, because of all these complicated feelings that can come up, and like the themes of family and
Mm-hmm.
identity and abandonment that are often explored in these
Mm-hmm.
types of movies, that it's important to ask yourself, am I the one who should be telling this story? Is adoption necessary to this
Mm-hmm.
plot line? And if so, what can I do to truly give respect to it on my
Hmm.
own before I involve other adoptees? Be specific about questions. But I think that it starts with, like, is this my story
That's
to
a
tell?
great question to ask oneself. I think that's really, really good advice. And, this podcast, I know a lot of adoptees listen. I know a lot of adoptive parents listen, but my hope is that just people will listen.
Yes.
So if you're listening to this episode and you know somebody in the media, somebody that's a writer or a director or I don't know, actor or somebody that has any sort of power or pull into what we see on screens, please share this with them because it's important for people outside of the adoption constellation to really get this because it does affect so many people when you put an adoption trope out there that's not accurate and that's hurtful. It can really hurt people. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Kira, for sharing your knowledge and your expertise and your lived experience as a transracial adoptee with us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me on and for your really insightful questions.
Good. Oh, good. Thank you. If people wanted to get a hold of you, how could they do that?
I am on social media as at Kira Omans, and I'm always happy to connect with new people.
Oh, very good. I'll put your social media links on the show notes so you can go find Kira and go check out her reels, you guys. She's an amazing actor and stunt person, and she can just kick butt. She's like, wow, wow. That's amazing. So, really cool stuff. So, after you go check out Kira's stuff and after you share this episode with someone, go check out Unraveling Adoption. We're on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. Subscribe. You can rate and review us as well. That really helps us to get the word out. I also want to let you know that I have an adoptive parent support group. It's free called Aptitude. And I also do adoptive parent coaching. So if you know any adoptive parents who are needing some guidance or some support, please send them my direction. You can find me through my website, unravelingadoption.com, at any time. All right. Well, thank you again, Kira. This has been a wonderful conversation. I hope it really impacts a lot of people. I know it will. And thank you all for listening. And Kira and I want you all to stay
Stay safe.
safe.